Japan has decided to release contaminated water from the Fukushima nuclear power plant into the sea. How does this affect us? According to Japan's Deputy Prime Minister, the treated water is so safe that it could be used as drinking water, and the US government has also confirmed that it is safe. On April 13, at a ministerial meeting, the Japanese government officially decided to release contaminated water to the Pacific in 2 years. Tokyo Electric Power Corporation also announced that fishermen in Fukushima would be compensated in the event of damage. Japanese Prime Minister Saga Yoshida said, "The government will ensure safety and take action in the event that misinformation is spread." He also stressing that the release of treated water is a necessary step in decommissioning nuclear reactors and revitalizing Fukushima. With this decision, Japan will be discharging contaminated water from its nuclear power plant for 30 years since 2023. Minister of Economy and Industry Gizami Hiroshi visited Fukushima Prefecture on the 13th and met with the governor of Fukushima Prefecture and the representative of the Fishery Association to explain the decision. He emphasized the need to stop at rumors about the treated water from the power plant. According to these, groups of citizens rushed to the government buildings and protested against the decision. The chairman of the National Federation of Fishery Cooperative said in the statement, "The act of the Japanese government to release contaminated water from nuclear power plant is unacceptable and is destroying the lives of fishermen across Japan. Until the actual discharge of contaminated water, a review by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission should be carried out and decided in the future. But these future processes will by then have become useless, because the expert panel of the Ministry of Economy, Industry, and Energy has already stated, when it comes to the pollutant, there are two methods of being released into the ocean and released into the atmosphere. However, from a technical point of view, the release into the ocean is a more reliable problem solution. But in reality, this solution has been nicely presented to hide the fact that releasing water into the ocean is simply the cheapest and most irresponsible way to solve this problem. In fact, diluting and draining contaminated water from nuclear power plant cannot remove the cause of the contamination. If this were possible, the Japanese government would have diluted the contaminated water in the last 10 years and used it for everyday purposes. But surprisingly, the Japanese government claims that it is okay to drink this treated water, as 62 types of radioactive pollutant have been filtered out by ALPS. Japan claims that the water is being further processed to remove dangerous isotopes and is being diluted well below World Health Organization standard for drinking water in an operation supervised by the International Atomic Energy Agency. In fact, Japanese Deputy Prime Minister Aso Taro, who attended the Tokyo Cabinet meeting on the 13th, said that it is okay to drink the purified water. The marine emissions are expected to reduce the cost required to making additional storage tanks. Since then, there has been a series of criticism within Japan saying, if you think that is safe, then drink it. However, the result of the ALPS study showed that this purification process cannot remove tritium known as carcinogens and carbon-14, which causes genetic mutations. Many experts also share the common argument that the current human technology cannot process tritium. The risk of this decision becomes even more significant after knowing that there is no scientific data on how contaminated water from nuclear power plants affects the human body. But the Japanese government uses the word treated water rather than contaminated water to influence against negative public opinion. South Korea, which is located right next to Japan, therefore continues to criticize Japan heavily more than ever. On the day of the announcement, the South Korean government called the Japanese ambassador to Korea, Aiboshi, and protested strongly against the decision on the part of Japan. And the Korean Ministry of Fishery protested against this decision too. Jeju Province Governor Won Hee-ryong also announced a tough response policy, such as filing a complaint with the International Maritime Court against the Japanese government decision. The Chinese Foreign Ministry also protested with an official statement. The sea is a common property of mankind, and the handling of contaminated water from nuclear accident is not a domestic problem in Japan. We urge Japan to recognize its responsibility and provide a scientific response that will address the serious concerns of the international community, its neighbors, and their citizens. The Global Times also reported that the release of contaminated water has been heavily criticized by China and neighboring countries for its extremely irresponsible behavior. Most Western media, however, remain silent about Japan's decision that will affect and compromise the health of hundreds of millions of people. Japan made the worst decision in the world. The British Guardian also criticized this decision as soon as the announcement came out. In an article titled, "Japan Announced Discharge of Contaminated Water into the Sea," The Guardian highlighted international concerns both from environmental groups and the fishing industry about the Japanese government decision. In particular, The Guardian directly used the contaminated water instead of the treated water used by the Japanese government. Japan's Greenpeace also strongly condemns the decision and saying that the Japanese government's claims to gloss over contaminated water as treated water is a clear mistake. Russia did not stand still either, because Russia in particular has been criticized by the Japanese government for having dumped radioactive waste into the ocean in the past. At that time, Japan was one of the countries most outraged by the Russia's environmental sinner acts more than any other country. The Japanese people therefore were really upset and said, "We are going to eat sushi that has been contaminated with radiation." And they flocked to the Russian embassy in Japan to protest day after day. In 1993, former Japanese Prime Minister Morihiro Hosokawa invited Russian President Boris Yeltsin to Tokyo for bilateral talks, prompting the two countries to recognize this an urgent problem and conduct a joint investigation. And at this time, Japan stressed to Russia that radioactive waste releasing could cause serious environmental problems in neighboring countries as well as around the world. That's why Russia criticized the Japanese government's decision more than everybody else. The relationship between Russia and Japan in terms of radioactivity is not very good anyway. For example, when a missile test suspected a radioactive leak due to the explosion in Russia in 2019, an important Russian government official said like this: "This is because the scientists eat Fukushima crabs." To everyone's surprise, however, there is one country that is on the side of Japan, with most countries, groups, and even China heavily criticizing Japan's decision. And this is the United States. The same day the Japanese government announced its decision to dump contaminated water, the U.S. State Department issued a statement supporting the Japanese government decision. This means that Japan and the United States have long been talking about this subject. State Department spokesman Ned Price said on the 12th that Japan's diversion of treated water complied with international safety standards and therefore supporting their decision. The Japanese government made a decision in close cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency. They made a transparent decision after reviewing various methods of treating purified water. Finally, an approach was chosen based on internationally recognized safety standards. The United States will continue to cooperate and communicate with the Japanese government on this matter. Foreign Minister Antony Blinken also tweeted on this subject. "We thank Japan for its transparent effort in its decision to dispose of the treated water from the Fukushima Daiichi site. We look forward to the government of Japan's continued coordination with the IAEA." Ned Price and Blinken used the term treated water instead of contaminated water as the Japanese government had already used. Of course, his tweet received a large number of critical comments. The US sided with Japan, knowing that the release of contaminated water would have a direct and indirect effect on the west coast of Alaska, California, Hawaii, and Guam. The US did not provide any justification for this decision, but the Biden administration has again come under criticism. The Biden administration previously criticized Trump for leaving the Paris Agreement and officially embarked on an environmentally friendly political path that said they should make the US, but also the world as a whole, more environmentally friendly. However, the Biden administration did not even show a neutral stance on this issue. Instead, it took the side of the Japanese government without further hesitation as the only government worldwide. And even more, they supported their decision to dump contaminated water into the Pacific Ocean for 30 years, which has absolutely nothing to do with environmental friendliness. So far, Japan has repeatedly shown an irresponsible stance in this regard by cleverly applying the international law for itself. How? According to the IAEA standard, oceanic radioactive material should be diluted to reduce the concentration sufficiently. But IAEA's standards for the discharge of radioactive substances are not clear. However, the main problem is that they are letting each country determine the standard itself in terms of concentration, dilution, etc. It is up to the country to reduce this standard if necessary. For example, tritium, which cannot be removed by the purification facility, does not have an international standard to be used when discharging, and each country can decide for itself. Therefore, the Japanese government does not have to publish information transparently and can simply say that we always try to adhere to the standard of the Japanese government. However, there is another realistic problem in here. Of the total IAEA budget in 2021, the US contribution was an overwhelming first place at 25.3% and Japan third place at 8.2%. Accordingly, it is questionable whether the IAEA was really free and not under pressure from the US government and the Japanese government. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea says that oceans must not be polluted and not negatively influenced by the seas of neighboring countries. But since the Japanese government does not provide objective data for their situation, no one can confirm or assess the adverse effects. In this situation, Hashimoto Toru, the former mayor of Osaka, made an unconventional proposal. According to the Japanese government claims that contaminated water is safe, it would not be right to just dump water at Fukushima. If Japan really thinks this is safe, they should be able to release this water in the Tokyo Bay as well. Therefore, if possible, I suggest distributing contaminated water to all parts of the country, starting with Osaka. There is no reason that only residents of Fukushima should be affected and discriminated against for more than 10 years. In fact, Hashimoto's proposal has been proposed several times by the residents of Fukushima. But of course, the Japanese government doesn't even consider or even mention such a proposal that contaminated water should be dumped into the Tokyo Bay. Under these circumstances, many citizen groups say that this is not just a Fukushima problem, but a global problem. And since this is not just a matter of Japan, there should be enough talks with countries around the world and a solution should be considered together. Without a global backlash and further action against Japan's government decision, Japan's contaminated water from Fukushima will be released into the Pacific in just 2 years. And this will not only have far-reaching, unforeseeable consequences to us, but also next generations. However, everything would be fine. According to Japan's Deputy Prime Minister, the treated water is so safe that it could be used as drinking water, and the US government has also confirmed that it is safe. What do you think of this video? Please share this video so that more people can become aware of this situation which affects all of us. Thanks for watching, comments, likes, and sharing. Be safe.